everyone, welcome back to Actual English. My name is Jennifer Clyde. Now it is time for lesson 83 and today let's talk about climate change. A topic that a lot of people seem to be talking about these days. Winters, summers, fall seasons, and even spring seasons. They have changed. Some seasons have gotten longer and some have gotten a lot shorter. For example, if you look at Korea, let's take a look at the four seasons, the four distinct seasons in Korea. Summers tend to be longer as well as winters, but then again, the spring season and the fall seasons, they seem to be a lot shorter than about 10 years ago, right? So sometimes people say we're getting more snow, but I remember as a little girl, we used to get lots of snow in Korea. I remember clearing the roads and the streets in front of our home, in front of our gate. But it is true that we are getting more snow and more drastic weather conditions. It's very cold. Summers are a lot hotter than before. Okay, so let's talk about all of that today. Okay, let's begin with our first segment. It's time for Actual Talk.
Rachel, have you noticed that here in Korea, the seasons, one of my favourite seasons of spring and autumn, are getting shorter and shorter?
I know, and the summers and winters are getting so much longer.
Too long.
Too long.
Yeah, I can't bear the freezing cold winters and then the boiling hot summers. They're like at both ends of
Hot
the
and
extremes.
sticky, I know what you mean. But I think that has a lot to do with global warming and climate change.
It must do, right? It must be
Yes.
linked somehow.
It definitely is. I heard that it snowed in the most untraditional snowing places in the Midwest
Really?
in the States.
Wow.
And people didn't really know how to deal with it because they never had to get the snow plows out before. They never really had to shovel the snow. So they were in for a big surprise when all of a sudden it snowed there. And
Absolutely.
it's due to climate change.
Yeah, and I think that's a trend that's happening all across the world, And I see more extreme weather on the news, like typhoons and torrential downpours and then droughts on the other hand.
Exactly.
And I don't know whether that's because like news networks are now concentrating more on like different countries that maybe they neglected before. But I'm sure there must be an increasing trend of these extreme weather events.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's a good reminder too for us because it's connected to protecting the environment as well.
Sure.
And it's connected to conserving energy and things like that. So it's really important for us to remember that the future is still there and we need to think about that whenever we're doing something.
Sure, we have an opportunity now before it gets too bad.
Exactly.
Before you go past that tipping point, I think we need to do something about it because many people tend to blind eye to climate change. They think it's natural, right?
Yeah, or they think it's so far away, right? So, for example, as in Antarctica, all the icebergs are melting, right? And that's creating, that's ruining habitats for polar bears and kind of ruining the ecosystem in general. But we don't really think about Antarctica because nobody really lives there.
We don't go there often.
We don't go there often, exactly. And so we don't think about it as a direct problem in our lives, but in reality it is, especially when we see it snowing in the Midwest or typhoons here and hurricanes there.
Sure.
So we really have to think about that and know that it's a problem that we need to deal with right now.
Before it's too late.
Before it's too late.
Welcome back, everyone. How did you enjoy today's Actual Talk conversation? Well, the two today are talking about climate change. That is our topic. And it is true that it kind of seems like a trend, right? A lot of people are worried about Mother Nature and Earth and what's happening around us. Of course, climate change is affecting not only people, but animals as well, and our environment. I guess we can talk about that as well. Well, let's check out what these two talked about today. All right, let's take it line by line. First of all, Peter says, Rachel, have you noticed that here in Korea, the seasons of spring and autumn are getting shorter and shorter. Now, shorter is used twice, especially to emphasize. Well, the spring season and the autumn season have gotten shorter. that's fine. But if you want to emphasize something, if you want to stress something, you can say that something has gotten a lot shorter and shorter. The movie or the movies these days that we watch, they've gotten a lot longer and longer, okay? Just to stress, you can use the words twice. But now, be aware, we're talking about 2 seasons, right? Spring and autumn, so we should always add an S right there. So it is the seasons of spring and autumn are getting shorter and shorter. Now, Rachel says, I know. So she's saying, yes, I have noticed. And the summers and winters, let's talk about these 2 seasons, are getting so much longer. I guess you can even say longer one more time, okay? So you can say summers and winters are getting much longer and longer. That is if you want to emphasize it, all right? So the whole point is the seasons of spring and autumn have gotten shorter, whereas the seasons of summer and winter have gotten longer than before. Now, Peter says too long. That's right. Summers and winters, they've gotten too long. I can't bear the freezing cold winters and then the boiling hot summers. Let's take a look at this sentence over here. It's very interesting. I cannot bear means I cannot tolerate. I cannot handle, meaning it's difficult, right? It's difficult to bear the freezing cold winters. We can say winters are cold, but also to emphasize, you can use wonderful words such as freezing. It's freezing cold. Freezing cold. What about hot? Of course, we can say summers are hot, but you can say that summers are boiling hot. 지글지글. Okay, so we're talking about hot weathers. Boiling hot, sizzling hot, okay? So winters are very cold and summers are very, very hot. They're at both ends of the extreme. What is extreme? Now, extreme, we're talking about the greatest severity, okay? From number 1 to maybe 100. Nothing in between, but something very far apart or something very different from one another. So we're talking about, now they meaning the seasons are at both ends of the extreme. So we're saying they are very, very different. They are far from each other. Now, Rachel says hot and sticky. Sticky, what is that? 끈적끈적한. That's true. I know what you mean, but you know, I think that has a lot to do with global warming. We'll take a look at this pattern later on, okay? It's underlined. Now, if you say that something has a lot to do with, you're saying that it is associated with something. There is some sort of connection, some sort of link, okay? It is related to each other. So she's saying that she thinks that a lot of this, right? A lot of the very hot summers and the very freezing cold winters, yeah, they have to do with, they are somehow connected to, or they are somehow related to global warming and climate change, which happens to be our topic for today. All right, moving on. Now, here, yes, Peter says it must be linked somehow. Linked. Connected somehow. I heard that it snowed in the most untraditional or unnatural snowing places in the Midwest. Okay, now she's saying this and Peter is especially surprised by saying really well because it rarely snows in certain areas, but she's saying, you know, it actually snowed a lot even in parts of the world that rarely get snow. Now, and people didn't really know how to deal with it, how to deal with all the snow. Why? Because they never had to get the snow plows out before. Okay, now snow is an easy word. We all know what that is, but what is a plow? Okay, now often when you go to maybe the countryside, there are a lot of farmers. They harvest crops. They may use a plow, right, to dig things from under the ground. Plow is spelt 2 different ways, like this, P-L-O-U-G-H, or as P-L-O-W. They're pronounced the same way, plow, plow. So snow plows are what we used Think of it as like a shovel to dig up snow. To clear snow, we would use snow plows. They never really had to shovel the snow. Shovel meaning using a shovel and shoveling as a verb. 자, 눈을 이렇게 떠서 치우는 거죠. Okay? So you can use a shovel to shovel the snow, to clear the snow. So they were in for a big surprise. Now, be in for something. We'll take a look at that pattern later on. Okay? Now, if you say that someone or something is in for something, you are saying that something is most likely to happen. It is inevitable. It is bound to happen. When all of a sudden it snowed there. Okay? So, of course, Peter agrees by saying absolutely. So far, Rachel is saying is that it snowed in a place that usually doesn't get much snow. So people, they didn't know what to do. They were in confusion, okay? Now she says once again, it's due to climate change, okay? There's some sort of relation. It somehow has to do with climate change. It is because of climate change. It's due to climate change. I think that's a trend that's happening all across the world. That's what Peter says. Let's take a look at the word trend, though. Trend is a very easy word. You all know what a trend is, right? Oh, that is a trend. It's trendy, meaning it's popular, but it can be used in this sense as well. It means that it is something that is happening over and over and over again. It's become popular. It has become more common in this case. So it's a trend that's happening all around the world, all across the world. And I see more extreme, once again, extreme weather on the news, like typhoons and torrential downpours. Also, droughts, on the other hand. Now, we'll take a look at downpours and droughts later on, but typhoon, 태풍 in Korean, and also torrential. We're talking about strong winds, okay? Strong winds that come with rain. They're called torrential downpours. We're getting lots of rain, heavy rain, and also droughts. It's a long period where we don't get rain, so a very dry period, a long dry period. Now he says, and I don't know whether that's because news networks are now concentrating. They're focusing more on different countries that maybe they neglected, meaning they ignored before. But I'm sure there must be an increasing trend of what? Trend of these extreme weather events. That's what Peter said. And I would even say weather conditions. You'll hear weather conditions, extreme weather conditions a lot here and there. So he's saying, I'm sure there must be an increasing trend of something. It's becoming more common. What? Seeing these extreme weather events or weather conditions. All right? Now, Rachel says, I totally agree with that. And I think it's a good reminder for us. A reminder is something that reminds us of something that makes us think about something, but it is a good reminder for us. Why? Because it's connected to protecting the environment, okay? It all has to do with preserving and protecting the environment. And she also says, the future is still there. Of course, the future is waiting for us, and we need to think about that. That meaning everything related to climate change and the future whenever we're doing something. We have an opportunity now. Of course, Peter says now. We should do something now when we have the chance. Before we go past that tipping point, okay? A tipping point is where there are minor problems or a minor problem, a very small problem, and it builds up. Small problems plus more small problems, they add up and they become a very big problem. Thus, if there is a big change, you can call that a tipping point where something tips over and a big change occurs. I think we need to do something about it because many people turned a blind eye to what? Climate change. They think it's natural. Now we'll take a look at this pattern later on too. Turn a blind eye to something means simply to ignore. 못 본 척하다. Okay, so because so many people ignored or didn't think much about climate change, yeah, they think it's natural. Or they think it's so far away, meaning we're talking about the future. Our future is so far away, right? For example, as in Antarctica. Pronunciation is not Antarctica, it's Antarctica. 약간 뜨 발음이죠? Antarctica. All the iceberg, 빙산, they're melting. And that's ruining habitats. These are areas where polar bears live and ruining the ecosystem in general. But we don't really think about Antarctica. Why? Because nobody really lives there. Quickly moving on. We don't go there even, right? And so Peter says we don't go there often. That's probably why people don't think much about what's happening in Antarctica. Polar bears are actually dying because they don't have food to eat. Anyhow, let's move on to the very final part of today's actual talk. So we don't think about it as a direct problem. Direct problem meaning a problem that is directly connected to us. But in reality, it is. Especially when we see snow in the Midwest or typhoons here and hurricanes there. So the whole point of what they are talking about is there are hurricanes, typhoons, there's a lot of snow, icebergs and glaciers are melting. The world, it's just going through so much pain, but people don't realize that it is a big problem because we don't see it every day. But the whole point is we can all do something and we have the opportunity now to do something. So we all should, help protect the environment. And yeah, that was an actual talk about climate change, so have a listen to it one more time.
Rachel, have you noticed that here in Korea, the seasons, one of my favourite seasons of spring and autumn, are getting shorter and shorter?
I know, and the summers and winters are getting so much longer.
Too long.
Too long.
Yeah, I can't bear the freezing cold winters and then the boiling hot summers. They're like at both ends of
hot
the
and
extremes.
sticky. I know what you mean. But, I think that has a lot to do with global warming and climate change.
It must do, right? It must be
Yes.
linked somehow.
It definitely is. I heard that it snowed in the most untraditional snowing places in the Midwest
Really?
in the States.
Wow.
And people didn't really know how to deal with it because they never had to get the snow plows out before. They never really had to shovel the snow. So they were in for a big surprise when all of a sudden it snowed there. And
Absolutely.
it's due to climate change.
Yeah, and I think that's a trend that's happening all across the world, And I see more extreme weather on the news, like typhoons and torrential downpours and then droughts on the other hand.
Exactly.
And I don't know whether that's because news networks are now concentrating more on different countries that maybe they neglected before. But I'm sure there must be an increasing trend of these extreme weather events.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think it's a good reminder too for us because it's connected to protecting the environment as well.
Sure.
And it's connected to conserving energy and things like that. So it's really important for us to remember that the future is still there and we need to think about that whenever we're doing something.
Sure, we have an opportunity now before it gets too bad.
Exactly.
Before you go past that tipping point, I think we need to do something about it because many people turn a blind eye to climate change. They think it's natural, right?
Yeah, or they think it's so far away, right? So for example, as in Antarctica, all the icebergs are melting, right? And that's creating, that's ruining habitats for polar bears and kind of ruining the ecosystem in general. But we don't really think about Antarctica because nobody really lives there.
We don't go there often.
We don't go there often, exactly. And so we don't think about it as a direct problem in our lives, but in reality, it is, especially when we see it snowing in the Midwest or typhoons here and hurricanes there.
Sure.
So we really have to think about that and know that it's a problem that we need to deal with right now.
Before it's too late.
Before it's too late.
Okay, are you ready for today's actual expressions? Let's begin with some vocab words just to refresh your memory. These words were all in today's actual talk conversation. So, what was extreme? We talked about extreme weather events, extreme weather conditions. Now, the synonym for that would be utmost or severe. I talked about the greatest severity, right? On a scale of 1 to 100, we're talking about 1 and 100. Two things that are very different from each other. What about plow? As I mentioned, it's spelt both ways, also as P-L-O-W, and it's pronounced plow. Plow, we talked about snow plows, used to clear snow, right? Downpour, stress goes on the first syllable. We're talking about heavy, drenching rain, lots of rain. Heavy rain, okay? And especially we talked about torrentious as well. So we're talking about a very heavy, continuous rain, okay? What about drought? Drought is a period, a long period of very dry weather. So when we don't get rain for many, many days for a long time, we can talk about droughts and also what was tipping point. Now imagine there's something and it tips over, meaning it can fall down. It can also tip over on this side too. It can fall down, tipping point. So we're talking about lots of minor problems that actually build up, resulting in a big change. Okay, let's move on to some patterns. We've got about 4 patterns for you, so let's quickly look through them. First one, have to do with something. In today's actual talk, there was have a lot to do with climate change, for example. My headache has to do with my worries. Remember I mentioned that it's linked, it's connected, to be associated with 어떤 연관성이 있다라는 말이죠. Have to do with something. My headache has to do with my worries, meaning because I have so many worries, I have a headache. Okay? What about this one? My stress has a lot to do with all the deadlines at work. So we're talking about how stress is related to deadlines. Okay? A has to do with B. They're somehow related or connected. Be in for something. What does that mean? I told you, if you say that something or someone is in for something, it is inevitable. 피해갈 수 없다. It's bound to happen, right? The weather forecast says we are in for heavy rain all day. What does that mean? We're in for heavy rain. It is going to rain no matter what, so be prepared for it. What about this one? You're in for real trouble. It's a very simple sentence, but if you want to tell maybe your kid or a friend, oh, you're going to be in trouble. I know you're going to be in trouble 100%. 너 100% 혼날 거야. Okay, 피해갈 수 있는 방법이 없어요. Then you can say you're in for real trouble, meaning you will get in trouble no matter what. It is inevitable. 피할 수 없다. Turn a blind eye to, as I mentioned, it means to ignore. Okay, turn a blind eye to. 못 본 채 하다. Okay, to someone or something. I knew Sue was cheating on the exam, but I turned a blind eye. You could also add because she is my best friend or she is my sister. 가장 친한 친구이기 때문에 혹은 동생, 언니이기 때문에 그렇죠. She was cheating on the exam. 해서는 안 되죠. 하지만 모른 채 했다. Okay, 모른 채 하다, 못 본 척 하다. Turn a blind eye. Okay? What about this one? I couldn't turn a blind eye to the injured cat. Meaning, I couldn't ignore the cat. So again, to help you understand, we're talking about turning a blind eye to something, ignoring something. You can also turn a deaf ear to something, which means ignore what somebody says. 못 들은 척하다 할 때는요, turn a deaf ear to 하시면 돼요. Okay, that is a wrap for today's actual expressions.
Climate change, comparing Korea's weather with the weather back home, Korea has like the two extremes. The winters here are horribly cold, extremely windy, but the summers, they're so hot, they're really, really hot, and it's so humid I'd have to say I'm surprised by how humid Korea actually is, especially if you think about the fact that it's not an island, it's not somewhere in the Caribbean or around the equator. So for being part of mainland, it's extremely humid. Back home, we have 4 seasons. It tends to change. Korea has mostly very long winter, very long summer, and like 2 weeks of autumn, 2 weeks of spring.
Thanks again for your help. It's time for actual story. Let's quickly take you straight in. Here we go. Comparing Korea's weather with the weather back home. Back home 나왔네요. 고향에 대한 얘기죠. My home country. Korea has 2 extremes. We see this word once again, 2 extremes. Now, one thing here we want to keep in mind is to compare something to or to compare something with. Usually, you use compare to liken things or to put things in the same category. But compare with means that you are examining something, especially examining the differences or the similarities between 2 things. All right? Okay, moving on. The winters here in Korea are horribly cold. Biting cold, terribly cold, freezing cold, and extremely windy. Okay? And one last line. Korea has mostly very long winters, very long summers, and like 2 weeks of autumn and 2 weeks of spring. Okay? So he's talking about each and every season of Korea. 우리가 actual talk에서 봤던 내용과 비슷하죠. Very similar. Summers and winters are long, but yeah, autumn and spring seasons are short. There are only about 2 weeks of these 2 seasons. Job well done, and thanks once again.
Climate change. Comparing Korea's weather with the weather back home, Korea has like the 2 extremes. The winters here are horribly cold, extremely windy, but the summers, they're so hot, they're really, really hot, and it's so humid. I'd have to say I'm surprised by how humid Korea actually is, especially if you think about the fact that it's not an island, it's not somewhere in the Caribbean or around the equator. So for being part of mainland, it's extremely humid. Back home, we have 4 seasons. It tends to change. Korea has mostly very long winter, very long summer, and like 2 weeks of autumn, 2 weeks of spring.
Well, time is up, everyone. It's time to say goodbye. Before we do so, thank you for tuning in today. Now, today we talked about climate change. When it comes to these topics, there's so much more you can talk about. So perhaps you can go over today's lesson, go over today's actual talk and expressions, as well as actual story. Make them yours by practicing them. Review them more on your own. I'll join you back next time and also talk about pollution. So that'll be interesting as well. Think about what you could possibly talk about when someone throws pollution at you. Okay, be ready for that. In the meantime, come to our homepage at www.ebse.co.kr. Look for Actual English with Jennifer and feel more than free to leave us some comments, all right? And even swing by just to say hello. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining me. I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.